Welcome, everyone, to Heal Your Mind, Heal the World podcast. My name is Anne Marie Morales, and I am here today with Donald Lee. He is a musician, a former band director, currently a podcaster, and he had me on his podcast just recently. And he also is an author of currently 5 books, mostly of inspirational material and spiritual growth. And without further ado, I'd love to welcome Don to the Heal Your Mind, Heal Your World podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Anne Marie. It's a delight and a privilege to be here on your podcast.
Yes, you're very, very welcome. You have a very eclectic, and that's the word that you use, kind of an eclectic life. It's You've done a lot of beautiful spiritual work, but can you take us to the very beginning? Did you start out as a spiritual individual? And what brought you into this kind of like spiritual? I would call it an awakening. It was an awakening for me. And what happened in your life?
Well, thank you very much for asking that. I was thinking about it last night, actually, as I was falling asleep. I wonder what Anne Marie's going to ask me, and I wonder what I'll say. But so it's kind of interesting because I grew up in an atheist family. Both my parents are atheists, right? They don't believe in anything. And I was thinking back to one of probably the very first distinct memory that I have as a little kid, because, we don't remember very much of our really early years, right? Typically. And we had just have these little vignettes here and there of things. And it's usually something that was emotionally impactful. And my first memory, so growing up in this atheist household, which in one sense was very freeing because like didn't matter, like they didn't believe anything. So, you can read anything you want, you can believe anything, it doesn't matter. It's all nonsense to them. But I remember I was probably about 3 or 4 years old because I hadn't started school yet, but I could talk. And my father and I were outside and he was weeding the garden or something like that. And you know how in a lot of houses, there's the house, and right beside the house, you have this little strip of garden, and then there's the sidewalk running down the side of the house. Well, Dad was kind of down on his hands and knees, and he was weeding the garden or doing something in the garden. I was just as a little toddler, kind of standing on the sidewalk, watching him and chatting with him. And I remember asking him, "What happens when you die?" And he said, "Oh, well, it's just all over. It's just blackness. It's just nothing. It's the end." And, my little 3 or 4 year old soul was just like shocked and terrified by this. I thought, that, that can't be. That can't be, but so I didn't know how to respond to that as a little toddler. And so that was the end of the conversation and the end of the vignette. And the and I remember as a little kid, my parents, like, they didn't believe anything, but they thought, well, we should give the kids like some kind of a religious education, because we do live in a kind of nominally Christian society. So for a while, they took us to a Unitarian church in where we were living. It was what's now considered a suburb of Toronto when I was really little. And so I don't have very many memories from that either. But the next memory that I have kind of on a spiritual journey is in about grade probably 4, maybe 3, I'm not sure which one, when a couple people from the Gideon Society came into our classroom and gave everybody little Bibles, like smaller than my hand, right? These little pocket Bibles contained I think it's the 4 Gospels and the Psalms. I think that's all that's in it. And it was the King James version, so difficult English to read, right? But I just treasured that. And I remember taking it home and starting to read, like you read any book, you start at page 1 or the table of contents or whatever you go through, which is, I was halfway through my life before I realized that's not the best way to read the Bible. I
Mm.
just so many times I started at the beginning, page 1, and read it, and I get through Genesis, and that's kind of interesting because it's all stories, and Exodus is all stories. That's interesting. And then you get into Numbers and Deuteronomy, and what's the fifth one of the Pentateuch anyway?
Leviticus?
Yeah, Leviticus. You get into
Leviticus?
those ones, then they're all, like it's just get bogged down in that stuff because there's no stories. So many times in my life, I started reading the Bible from the beginning and didn't really get very far past Genesis and Exodus. But I've always treasured that, and I still have that little Gideon Bible. And I loved that. And even as a little kid in grade 3 or 4, reading through the thou and thee and all that kind of stuff. And somehow my soul just resonated with that in a way that my parents would never understand. So that was kind of my early things. And the next thing that really kicked it off, well, two things really. I had the same band director all the way through junior and senior high school. Loved him. You know how he did. That's kind of what inspired me to go on and become a musician and later a band director. And he was actually also worked part time as the pastor at one of the local churches. And so, when you're spiritual, you see the whole world through spiritual eyes. So, so we would often get little mini lectures as part of our band classes and stuff like that. And I loved that. And then one summer I went to band camp. I mean, everybody who remembers what is it, American Pie and the
Yeah.
and the girl that and one time at band camp, anyway, there was this time at band camp, and I met this kid who was just really turned on about this guy with the weird name, Edgar Casey. Edgar
Oh.
Cayce, like, who is this like guy with the weird name? Oh, and he had these visions, and he talks about Atlantis, and Atlantis was real, and all these changes, and the world's gonna, all these things are gonna happen, and all this stuff. And wow, this kid was really excited about it. So after band camp, I went home, and we didn't have the internet in those days. This was early 1970s. But when I had a chance, I went to there was a bookstore. We were living in what at that time was a small town just outside of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And there, for many years, I frequented a little bookstore in it's kind of a part of town that people think of as sort of the bohemian, kind of like the weird far out part of town, the hippies and the dope smokers and the all that kind of people. There was a little bookstore there. It's not there, it hasn't been there for years, but it's called the Metaphysical Bookstore. Every city had one or two or three. And over the years of my kind of high school years, I would often kind of wander through there and pick up various, fascinating books. So I picked up a couple of books as I was still kind of my late junior high school years, probably grade 8, grade 9, grade 10, on Edgar Casey, and started reading some of the Edgar Casey books and stuff and get really turned on. And that was kind of the beginning of my delving into metaphysical things and led me down all kinds of paths. Like I said, my parents didn't believe anything, so they didn't care. Like, read whatever you want. So, I read the Bhagavad Gita and I read about, the Eastern spirituality and, books on astrology, like all kinds of stuff. And that was kind of my kind of beginning. And then later on, as a young man, I got involved in New Thought. Some people will be familiar with uh, the ideas of New Thought, kind of a branch of Christianity. It's kind of blended now in with the unity churches. In fact, been currently attending a unity church again. So that was kind of the beginning of my journey. Then I got married, and my wife wanted to go back to the Catholic Church, so I became Catholic, and we raised our kids Catholic, and spent a lot of years there, taught in Catholic schools and all that kind of stuff. So, um, in the last since I've retired, I've kind of um, fallen away from Catholicism and broadened my gone back to my metaphysical roots, you might say, and
Mhm.
but always interested in, particularly, as you had mentioned in our interview, interested in the Christian mystics. I was always
Yeah.
kind of thrilled by that, and these people who experienced what we might call spirituality, or what I sometimes call spiritual reality, who experienced it in a much more direct way than most people. Most people just go to church and kind of, well, okay, yeah, I guess there's this whatever you say, kind of thing. And I found that in every religion. I taught for 4 years in international schools in Muslim countries, right? 2 years in Kuwait and 2 years in Pakistan. And it's
Oh.
very interesting when I saw the people there. We often here in the West, we get that we were given this vision that, you know, that all the Muslims are these fanatic guys. But I found the same thing there, that there's probably only about 5% of people who are, quote, in a religion who are really passionate about it, and the rest are some variety of hangers on, so to speak. And particularly in Muslim countries, there's still that social pressure that we used to have here in North America a couple generations ago, right? That, if you didn't show up to church on Sunday, then Monday everybody you met would be asking you, "Oh, I didn't see it. Are you feeling okay? I didn't see a church, or what's the problem?" And so, people would just go to avoid that kind of, irritation. And I remember asking one of my high school students in in uh, in Kuwait about, he said, because Friday is the holy day in in um, in Islam.
Hmm.
And I remember asking him, he said, "Oh, so you always go to prayers on Friday?" "Yeah, pretty much always." And so are you really passionate about your faith? And like most teenagers, right? He said, "Nah, I don't really go for all that stuff." And so I asked him, "Well, why do you always go?" And in the Islamic cultures, they're still very family oriented, right? The family and father is very powerful, right? Within the family, and the uncles and the aunts and stuff, all, very close now. They typically have on Friday afternoon and evening, then they typically have big family dinners, that sort of thing with extended families. And so he said, "Well, if I don't go, my uncles will say to me, 'Oh, I didn't see a prayer today, I mean, what's the matter?'" So and so same thing. He said, "I just go because I don't want to just, it's such a hassle if I don't go." Right? So just go and go through the motion. So I think in every religion everywhere, about 95% of the people are mostly going through the motions, and 5% are passionate about their faith.
Oh, that
Anyway, so
sounds
that's
beautiful.
a brief. So I've had yeah, as far as what I've done to get by in the physical world, I count myself as being in my third career. So I wanted to be a musician, went off into that direction, went to university, taking a music performance program, and dropped out of that. And when I realized this wasn't the life I wanted, as much as I loved music, it's tough to make a living as a musician, really tough. And most musicians don't have successful personal lives. And I wanted to have kind of a normal life, wife, kids, happy family, all that kind of stuff. And so I dropped out of that and ended up taking a job, and my life took a totally different direction that I never planned, never anticipated. But I spent almost 2 decades in the fertilizer industry in Western Canada in various roles, et cetera, and whatnot, and ended up going back to university, finally finishing a degree in economics, and um, worked in the fertilizer production plants, and worked in a chemical fertilizer plant in operations, a little bit in maintenance, and then I worked in marketing for a while, and worked in a marketing role in our new products research group. And then in 1999, the consolidation in the fertilizer industry, like every industry, I got laid off. Went back to university, got a second degree in education, and became a band director, and spent almost 2 decades as a band director, mostly in Alberta, but 4 years overseas. And
Oh, that
then
is beautiful.
about 7 years ago now, I retired from teaching officially to start what I count as my third career as a spiritual author and speaker. So kinda that's where I'm at now, trying to write books and all that kind of, and as you know, a few months ago, started a spiritual podcast.
That's beautiful. I really love the fact that you were able to experience the culture of, you said Kuwait and what else?
Pakistan.
And Pakistan. Oh, very interesting. And it just brought up to me how we really are all the same. Like we're just humans, right? We're humans and we live in the
Yeah.
human condition. And we really just people, like all these divisions that politics and religion tries to throw upon us. It's just ridiculous. Um, and so I know that you are very spiritually aware. Yes, obviously, you're very spiritually aware. And we do have a lot of similarities, you know, with the Catholic background and the unity background
Teaching.
now, where, and we also have a connection through A Course in Miracles. And I was
Yes.
wondering if you would just kind of talk about how A Course in Miracles came into your life and what has that practice done for you?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you, Anne Marie. You know, I heard the name A Course in Miracles probably back somewhere in the 1980s. Heard it mentioned, you know, other people that I knew within when I was part of the Catholic Church in our community that we lived in at that time. And, you know, I thought, oh, that sounds fascinating. Like, I'd like to do miracles like Jesus, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And there's a course on it, you know. But I, you know, you're busy with, you know, career and that. I mean, for a while there, I was working full-time shift work at the plant. I was technically a full-time student at university, and I was also trying to be a full-time husband and father to 4 kids. So like I was just, you know, I didn't have any extra time. So you know, as we're growing up, we're raising our families, we have a job, all this kind of stuff. There's not a lot of time for other stuff.
Right.
And so I never did anything with it. But when I retired 7 years ago, I can't remember if it was before I retired or after, but it's close to about that time. I thought, you know what, I had to check out this Course in Miracles thing that, you know, it's always wanted to, for somewhere, you know, the idea came up again in something I read or heard. And I thought, yeah, I checked that out. So I can't remember how I started off. I think it was, I bought just the Uh, there's 3 sections, and what's the big section?
It's there's the text and there's the workbook.
Yeah, the
And
text. I think I
then,
just started off with the text and started reading through that, and, you know, it didn't make a lot of sense. So I'm probably on, you know, in the middle of my 4th time going through it. But then somewhere along the line, somehow I thought, "Oh, you really should get the combined volume." And all. Okay, so I got the combined volume, and that helps a lot because when you do the little meditations that go along, you know, the idea is that there's 365 of the little they don't even call them meditations, but they really are, right?
mhm,
When you do
yeah.
those, then it really helps you with the you know, incorporating the ideas. In fact, I ended up doing the same thing in my most recently published book, which is a study guide to go along with my first book, which is a book of modern day parables. So for most of the last 7 years, I have my, you know, times when I do other things and stuff like that. But, you know, I would take the time pretty much first thing in the morning when I get up, and I would read one section of the text, and I would then do, you know, one of the meditations. I try to keep going one little section of text each day and one little meditation each day because it's meant to be a different one each day for 365 days. So you get through the whole course in a year. Well, I've never got through the whole course in a year, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So it's your own. It even says, right, as you remember in the election, this is a course in miracles. It is a required course, right? Only the time that you take it is optional. Which is
Right.
fascinating. Okay, so the time that you spend taking it is also optional. I mean, depending on, you know, your state of consciousness and all the rest, maybe you'll do it one time and incorporate it all. I don't know if anybody's ever done that, but you know, most of us go through it once and then go through it again and go through, and it becomes almost like, okay, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And
Mm.
every time, I think now that I'm on about the fourth time going through it, I'm understanding it a little bit better. The first time through, and it even says, and it's, of course, it's not clear, but it's Jesus speaking,
Right.
right? So that it's Jesus speaking, um, channeled through, the author. And what was it? It even says several times, just do this. Just say this little meditation. You won't really understand it right now, but it doesn't matter, right? Because you're taking little baby steps, and it's almost like a prayer. And that, like, the rote prayers of the Catholic Church, and and you go through them, and over the years you see other shades of meaning, at least for you. They kind of start to mean something different as you go through your own journey through life and through in your spiritual growth. So, of course, in Miracles, I think, is kind of like that too. Have you found that to be the same way, Anne Marie?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I do the lessons very religious. I just happen to have my book right at my desk here. But I do interesting. Well, I'm a hypnotherapist, so the subconscious mind fascinates me. And I just said, I do this religiously. I just said that. So, what I love about A Course in Miracles is, yeah, number one, I say to myself all the time, you've read this, you've done the lessons, the 365 lessons, 5 times now. And each time I go through, I'm like, oh my God, I don't even remember this. This is beautiful. This is poetic. Like, this is such love is exuding from this text. And it's, yeah, each time you look at it, or you read it, you experience it, and it touches a deeper level. And the truth about A Course in Miracles is that it's a mind training. So it is deprogramming you from what was programmed into you about what God is, who you are, who Jesus is. And it's retraining your mind as to a truth that resonates so deeply. So deep, at least for me personally, it resonates so deeply for
Yeah.
me.
Like right near the very beginning, one of the
Mhm.
first one, maybe even the very, very, look around you at all the things you see.
Oh yeah.
Nothing you see is real. That's so good. All right, gonna slap you upside the head. They go, okay, you need to adjust the way you perceive. That's an important idea, right? The difference between perception and knowledge. And
Yeah.
all of us, we're in the world of perception. When you look at something, what do you see? Right? That's perception.
Mm-hmm.
That's not knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Knowledge is something, and essentially, perception is what comes from outside us in, and knowledge comes from inside us,
So what you
because
just
that's our connection with God.
right, what you just mentioned just brought up this imagery. Like when we go through life, kind of like unawake, unaware, we're just viewing life through this very narrow pinhole kind of thing. And so
Yeah.
every little thing is magnified and made into this big deal. Once we begin to open up our vision and we begin to open up our perception of what we're really dwelling in, then it becomes like, this concept of, oh, this isn't real. And forgiveness as well. For me, forgiveness really resonated as a theme in A Course in Miracles. And what you just mentioned, how lesson number 1 or 2, nothing is real. We are assigning the meaning of this
Yes.
pen, right? But what's beautiful for me is that, and it determines kind of like where you are in this journey. I remember being on a call with Matthew Brownstein, who I interviewed, like was like my second guest on this new iteration, this Heal Your Mind, Heal the World podcast. he did a series of lectures on A Course in Miracles last year, and they're all on the hypnotherapy website, YouTube. And I talked about how it was a big realization for me to forgive not only my ex-husband, because that was a big catalyst in my own awakening, but to forgive the entire context of my marriage. And he went further beyond and said, marriage isn't real. So there's no need to forgive it. It's not real. And I'm just like, my mind is like blowing in all in all manner of ways, that this reality is so, I don't know, it's seemingly real, but it's not. Can you talk about a little bit what are your thoughts on that and the nature of reality and the constructs um, that we find ourselves in? My hair today.
Uh, Excuse me, I'm just still in the last little dregs of this horrible cold that is just taking forever to go away completely.
No way.
Yeah, like what's real and what's not real, and
Mhm.
and what does that mean? And I have really kind of drawn on that theme in a couple of my recent books, where I try to emphasize that everything that we've done, and tying in with forgiveness here, right? Because the Course of Miracles says when you really get to the point of forgiveness and you realize that, well, none of this actually happened, because nothing here is actually real.
Real. Yes.
And that which is truly you, has never been hurt, because it can't be hurt. Right at the very beginning, the beautiful summation of the whole Course in Miracles: nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Therein lies the peace of God. And you think, what? So the the next 1,200 pages of the book is to try to get you to understand those three those three brief summary statements. And so what's real? Nothing physical is real. I mean, we often think about ourselves as being an amalgam of body, mind, and soul. And the body and all of what we call physical material reality, it's not real. Only your soul is real. And your soul is never hurt by any of this. It's all just experiences. And we're here, this whole physical world, and our, you know, involvement in the physical world, our incarnation into the physical world, is all just so our soul can have experiences. And our soul loves all of the experiences, the good and the bad. Right? Because so it's like Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage, right? And the actors, what is it, to strut and huff and puff for our moment and then are gone, and it means nothing. Right? But it doesn't really mean nothing. It's all experiences we're having, and it's all good. So, whatever good, and I'm now divorced as well. So, yeah, whatever good and bad happened in that marriage relationship, well, it was all experiences.
Mhm.
And none of it was actually real. So there is nothing to forgive. That's when you get to the point, when you get that, I don't think you can jump right there. But I think you have to go through this. Okay, I'm going to forgive. It's okay. And you forgive others and you forgive yourself, because it's kind of all part of the same thing. I can maybe later touch on that similarity between love and forgiveness in that way. They're not really things that we do or feel, they're states of consciousness, right? So if you if you're in that state of consciousness of forgiveness, then forgiving yourself and forgiving others, it's all the same.
Mhm.
It's a state of consciousness of forgiveness. And then the next step, I think, is understanding, or trying to understand. I mean, intellectually, it's really impossible for us to grasp it, that that none of this actually happened. And it was all neat. It's all it's all good. We learned something from everything, and that's why we're having these experiences for soul growth, for soul learning,
Right.
because our soul is who we are.
Hmm. Yes, it's the truth of who we are. So we also have similar background in education. I was almost 18 years as an art teacher, elementary art teacher, and you were a band and a music teacher. And it profoundly, I mean, I love how you in your books took examples from your educational career and are teaching from them. So, could you talk a little bit about your books and the inspirations and share some anecdotes? I'd love to hear about that.
Oh, sure. Um, well, throughout my teaching, you know how it is as a teacher. Certain things happen, and from time to time, we often call them teachable moments. And in reality, we rarely really take advantage of them, but nonetheless, we recognize them as teaching. There's a bigger lesson happening right here than the one I was trying to teach you, right? The alternate F sharp fingering of the clarinet, right? That's what the lesson was about, right? But there's something, the interaction of the people. So um in the early part of my career as a band director, I thought I should write some of these down and make a little, other people like the veterinarian who wrote the All Things Bright and Beautiful, funny and interesting and poignant little stories about being a vet, and other people who have written books then that have become, really popular because everybody can relate to them. They're just human experiences with wonderful little stories. So I started and then it never had time, right? I wrote down one story and about, I don't know, 2005, 2006, something like that, and then never wrote down any more for over a decade. And then, I thought, I should start writing some of these down. So I did start writing some of the little things down and turning them into modern day parables, right? So this is my first book. Right? That's me with my pre-COVID haircut. I don't know if there's glare on it. With the short businessman haircut that I had for most of my adult life. But it's called The Band Director's Lessons About Life. And it's 50 little parables, modern day parables, all kind of created from incidents that happened when I was teaching. And I thought, so each one has a story part and then a reflection part that draws a spiritual lesson out of the events of the story, because the events of the story are it's all every parable is a metaphor, and that's really what a parable is, right? It's a metaphor, whether it's the Jesus talking about the sower sowing wheat seeds on the ground, right? It's a metaphor for spiritual reality. And in essence, just what we were talking about, that our life isn't real, our physical life isn't real, our physical life is really like a metaphor for spiritual reality. So these little stories, 50 little stories, each one is a parable about love, a parable about forgiveness, a parable about perseverance, right? Parable about being yourself, all this kind of stuff. And so yeah, that was my first book, and I started on that before I retired and finished it the year that I actually retired, 2019. There's 50 parables in
Oh,
that book, The Band Director's Lessons About Life. And what I've done is I've made a little mini ebook that has 5 of the 50 parables, plus the
oh,
introduction and a few things, other things, the introduction to each section, stuff like that. So you get the kind of the flow of it. And I give that away for free. So anybody who would like, they just click on the link in the show notes and they can go to the site where you can download that ebook for free and read through, 5 of the 50 parables. See if you
oh,
enjoy
that's
it.
wonderful. That's a very
It's a bit
generous
like a
thing.
chicken soup for the soul book, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's lovely. You have been, from what I'm hearing from you and just intuitively, like you definitely came in with a purpose to bring in light, to bring in and to teach. It's obvious it's a part of you. And that's just so lovely. What have you noticed over the course, over these past, let's say the past, I don't know, 10 years. So we're 5 years post COVID. What have you noticed in the changing of maybe humanity's openness, the mindset? What have you noticed in your experience?
Well, I think that I am seeing what many people are talking about, that the gradual change in consciousness of a lot of people.
Mhm.
For example, of my 5 books, 3 of them are in what I call the band director series, strictly spiritual books. But then when COVID came, and nothing made sense anymore. Like, why are we doing this? This is absurd. And so, my life was turned upside down at that point, like so many other people's lives. And like so many other people at that time, I ended up going down the rabbit hole on the internet because we couldn't do anything else, couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything. The things were everything was closed, stores were closed, public buildings were closed, sports things were closed. Yeah, it was just bizarre for the flu.
Mm.
Anyway, so I ended up going down the rabbit hole trying to figure out what the hell was going on. And after about 2 years of research and writing, then I published a book by that name, What the Hell's Going On? And
Oh.
I think it's still probably the best overall big picture book that explains from many different angles and perspectives of what's going on in our world. And then, so that was published in the fall, just the very end of 2022. And for a good part of 2023, I did a long cross Canada book and speaking tour, speaking to freedom groups about ideas from that book. And then the next winter, I kind of closeted myself um, in out in the desert in Arizona in my trailer and produced a follow-up book that looked more at solutions to the mess we're in called The Way Forward. So those 2 books I call my The Way Forward series. And then I did another tour in for the most of 2024, where I again went all across Canada talking to different freedom groups about ideas from the way forward. And as I did that, then I came in contact with an awful lot of people that I didn't know, right? Speak to a group of 30 or 40 or 50 people, and some of them come up afterwards and talk and whatnot. And a part of both of those books is the spiritual component of what's going on in the world today. And most books about what's going on in the world today don't talk about spiritual component, but I do very explicitly. And so quite a few people in my cross Canada speaking tours came up to me and said things like, you know, I've I've never had anything to do with this religion, spiritual stuff, but I find myself being drawn to it. And that been an indication to me that, yeah, interesting. There seems to be an opening up to spiritual things amongst an awful lot of people who were never open to it before.
Right. Oh, I had no idea about that part of your book series. So I'm so glad that we came to that point in our conversation. That's fascinating to me. Um, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what the hell is
Wow.
going on? And it's a thick book. I made it as short as I possibly could, so I left some things out. Not everything's in there. Can't put everything in one book. And then the way forward. That's a book of solutions, and most of the book is focused on the 3 types of warfare that are being used against us: spiritual warfare, psychological warfare, and on the physical level, it's what's called 5th generation warfare. So I
Mhm.
explain, at least in a general sense, how each of those 3 types of warfare work and how we can sensibly respond on all of those 3 levels of body, mind, and soul. Because so much of what we've done and continue to do to kind of push back against the assaults against us simply hasn't been effective. And so that's why I say what we can sensibly do. And I also bring up the point that everything is fundamentally spiritual, and we are fundamentally spiritual beings, as we just said about A Course in Miracles. Nothing in the material world is real. So the fundamental and most important war is on the spiritual level. If we lose there, we lose everywhere. If we win
Yeah.
there, we win everywhere. And the spiritual battle is only fought within,
Mhm.
right? It's never a battle against anyone or anything out there. It's
Correct.
within us. And
That's the
that's
whole.
possibly what makes it the most difficult of all the types of warfare to kind of wrap your mind around and have the courage to face. But like every myth, every great story is all about overcoming self,
Hmm.
right? Whether you look at the Lord of the Rings or, like any of the great stories, the hero's journey stories, the dragon that we fight is always within ourselves.
Hmm.
The dragon that's out there is simply a projection of that which is within ourselves. And so
That
the
is so
hero's
in
journey
alignment.
is
Yeah.
always a journey of self-development and change within. And then the outer world changes. So our
Right.
spiritual warfare is really directed to raising our own consciousness.
Correct.
The way I put it is that when you raise your own consciousness, all of the spiritual attacks against us, which come at a lower level, because at a higher spiritual level, nobody attacks. Course in Miracles talks about this all the time. Don't attack and don't defend, because defense is attack, right? What you
Hmm.
do is you raise your level of consciousness up to a level where these attacks, spiritual attacks and physical and psychological attacks, they have no effect on you, because it's like they're coming at a lower vibration. It's like I don't know. I mean, you're a musician, right? They're
Hmm.
they're playing they're playing A440, but you're several octaves above that, and you're not affected at all by what's going on, by those
Hmm.
attacks. You're not drawn into them. You don't defeat because you don't attack. You simply transcend the level at which the attacks are happening, and they become meaningless. They disappear for you. That's kind
That's
of it
right.
in a nutshell. That might seem
Mhm.
bizarre to a lot of our listeners, but I do explain it more fully in the books.
Well, like I said, I had no idea about this vein of material that you have produced, and it's very much in alignment with my own personal journey. We were introduced by a mutual acquaintance, a mutual friend that I met through a lot of um, my disclosure community that I was immersed in for many, many, many years. And so I've come to notice, yes, there's definitely um, a concerted effort to keep us sick, dependent, and confused about our true nature. And I'm totally in agreement with that. I've also, though, found in my own personal experience, and I've channeled this, and it's come through me. We're in a dimension that doesn't want us to go. So there's the concept of ascension, that we're moving into a new age, the age of Aquarius, the new, integration of the divine feminine, where we're coming from a very heavy masculine energy into now a feminine energy. But the controllers, the seeming controllers, they don't want us to leave. They don't want us to go. So it's like they're upping their game a little bit. Um, what have you
And becoming
experienced?
desperate.
Yeah, they're becoming desperate. So have you experienced any of that in your realm?
It, yes, in many ways, I'm just trying to formulate some ideas on how best to respond to that.
Hmm.
You see, um,
Well, let me
and it's
just
a
expand.
in Oh, that's okay. I in my book, What the Hell's Going On? Part of what I go through is that totalitarianism in its many, many forms, give it whatever name you want, call it communism, call it fascism, call it technocracy, or give it whatever name you want. They're all different flavors of totalitarianism and take you to the same place and work on the same principles. And that is to keep you dependent. It's fundamental. Most people don't understand this
Right.
about communism,
Right.
for example,
Yeah.
is that they want to keep you dependent upon the state. Like that's the only way they can continue to have power over you is to keep you dependent upon the state. Because if you're independent of the state, then the state can't control you. And the
Right.
whole point is control. The whole point is power. And that is a material or outward manifestation of this spiritual desire for power. Like one of the great temptations of Christ, right? Power. Oh, I'll
Mm.
give you the whole world. All you got to do is worship me, right? You're going to have power over all the nations of the world. The desire for power. And as you also know, this is focused in the third chakra, right? And that's sort of where our collective consciousness in the world is at right now. It's kind of focused on certainly the lower three chakras, right? The the material wealth and sex and addictions to
Mhm.
alcohol and drugs and all that kind of stuff and money and your social position and your respect within the community, all and the power over other people, the hierarchical structures that we have in our world today, not just our governments, but everything, unions, professional associations, everywhere we go, we have these hierarchical structures where the people at the top have power, right? It's all about power. And as I say, even in the way forward, that we have to move up in our consciousness from a focus on power to a focus on love, right? The
Mhm.
fourth chakra, the heart chakra, is kind of like a pivot between the lower three material chakras and the upper three spiritual chakras. And we
Absolutely.
have to make that transition. And the key to do that is love.
Absolutely.
And now I've kind of lost track of. Oh, okay. So the material. So all of these things we see this with our own governments, which have become um, functionally totalitarian as well. I make this point in the way forward that even though we have the form of democracies still in the world, none of them are functioning democratically. They're functioning as dictatorship. I mean, look at our recent war. Here we have another war undertaken by the president. The president of the United States does not have the authority to start to declare war. Only Congress can declare war. And I think I may be mistaken. I think the last time Congress declared war was in December 1941 to
Mhm.
enter the Second World War. All of the other wars that the United States has been in, and Canada has, I'm Canadian, Canada has also taken part in, were undeclared. Like they weren't technically wars because Congress never declared war. Same here. Are we not, is the United States not at war with Iran? Of course it is. But
Mhm.
Congress didn't approve that, right? So we have this power that's been collected into the presidency. It doesn't matter who the personality is. All of this is independent of personalities, right? Because all of our democratic structures are functioning dictatorially. And
Mhm.
so, I say in the way forward, for example, I say we need to go back to 1776 thinking, where the fathers of of the American Revolution thought that, well, we want to get out from under this tyranny of this tyrannical king, but we don't want to just set up another monarchy in America. That's no good. And it's just substituting one tyrant for another tyrant. What we need is to establish a structure and form of government that cannot be tyrannical. And they did a wonderful job. But over the last 250 years, that structure too has been corrupted and perverted and has become dictatorial. So we need to go back to the drawing board and take that 1776 thinking and start to go over and think, hey, how do we create a structure of governing ourselves that where we truly have democracy, right? And the key thing that the founding fathers realized is that you cannot have power concentrated. You have to have power distributed, disseminated, decentralized, and they tried to do that, right, with the balancing powers between the administrative, the judicial, and the legislative functions of government, and the balance between the power of the federal government and the power of the states, and all that kind of stuff. But over 250 years, the power tends to accumulate. Going back to what you said about, this the ascension process that we're in, nobody and no thing gives up power voluntarily. So, whatever spiritual forces in the world are holding power today, no, they don't want to give up that power, and they never will give up that power voluntarily. We have to take that power back.
Hmm.
Power is never given, it is taken.
Hmm.
And we need to take
And
back our power
yeah.
that God intended that we have.
Hmm.
And but but that also means responsibility,
Right.
right? In so many ways, we have given away our responsibilities. And I say in both those books, freedom and responsibility live on two sides of the same coin.
Hmm.
You cannot you cannot have freedom without responsibility, and you cannot lose responsibility without losing freedom. And we have, over the decades, freely given up our responsibilities and thereby given up our freedoms. So,
Hmm.
I mean, we want the government to take care of our health. We want the government to take care of our retirement. We want the government to do all these things for us. And yet, if we are to be free, we have to take back our responsibilities for those things. And
Yeah.
then we will have freedom over those things.
I've
Anyway,
come
I've
to
kind of
under
rambled on a bit there, Anne Marie.
Yeah. I've come to understand that nothing can be taken from us that we're not willing to give away. And so
Oh, yes.
one of the things that I've begun to do is just make more conscious decisions as to what I'm going to give from me. And it would be my attention, my time, my mental space, my energy. What am I giving to TV programs, to various systems? It's me making a choice. Am I going to watch the news? No. Am I going to participate in, quote unquote, the medical system, how it is? I went through a big couple of health situations over the past couple of years, and I was very stern with the doctor. He's like, well, we're going to do a biopsy. I'm like, no, you're not. You're not. No way. You're not going to puncture my neck. You're not going to get a biopsy from this gland. No way you're going to do that. And he's like, okay, I'm starting to see who you are. I'm like, yes, sir. You are seeing who I am. And then I had another issue with a growth in a breast, and God, they wanted to puncture my boobie and take a sample because God, you're going to have cancer and you're going to die. And I'm like, no, you're not going to touch my boobie. You're not going to do that. I was like, there's other ways to monitor. Look, it's itty bitty. Anyway, I've gone through this in my post, but long story short, I never got a biopsy. I monitored it on my own, and I found um, practitioners that will work with me, because damn, these systems, they just want to control you and fill you with fear. So what a beautiful, I'm so glad that we went on this tangent, because it's very resonant with my own life, and I'm sure with the lives of the viewers of the podcast. And so where are you about now? Are there any projects that you are working on that you want to share? And how can people get in touch with you if they want to get more information?
Oh, thank you very much, Anne Marie. Well, my website is easy to remember. It's www dot, of course, cominghomespirit.com. And it's because, really, all of us are on this journey back home to God. So cominghomespirit.com. And if you go there, there's lots more information about the books I've published so far. There's links to my Shopify page. You can buy them directly from me. They're also, of course, all available on Amazon as well. Um, so what the books I've published so far, there's 3 that fall into my band director series. That's the Band Director's Lessons About Life, which is a book of 50 modern day parables. And then the next book I published was a little one called The Band Director's Pocket Guide to Spiritual Growth, because I wanted to sort of bring together 3 simple steps for people. Um, because sometimes we think, oh, it's massive. And of course, the Miracles is massive, right? So I put
Mhm.
it together in a tiny little book. You can't quite fit it in your pocket, but pretty close. And to make it the whole process of spiritual growth, to simplify it. And then the most recent one is a study guide to go along with my book of parables. And that essentially turns the book of parables into a year-long course in spiritual development, a little bit like A Course in Miracles, but it's not channeled. It's not Jesus speaking. It's just me speaking based on what I know. And all 3 of those books, I use the band director trademark, because music is a metaphor for our spiritual life and spiritual growth in all of those books. It's just a metaphor that runs through it. And then my 2 books about, what's going on in the world that I call the Way Forward series. First one, the what the hell's going on, and the second one, the Way Forward. And I'm currently working on a couple of books in different stages in the process now that I think of as fitting into a genre that I think I've made up called expose memoir, where through the
Nice.
story, kind of the life story of a person, that certain ills in our society are exposed. For example, about almost a year ago now, last spring, I started working with a former hospice nurse in British Columbia, Canada, who was pushed out of her job and career when what we call MAID, medical assistance in dying, came into Canada. And gradually now we don't we don't we, we just kill people. Like
Yeah.
it's absolutely absurd. So that is kind of exposing this whole, euthanasia, which is really legalized murder, exposing that as part of her particular journey in life. So there'll be a little series of books that I call expose memoirs on those kind of issues.
Yeah.
That's what I'm working on at the moment.
Well, that's fascinating. And thank you so much, Don, for being here with me today. This was a great conversation. I really am so happy, so pleased that we got to integrate not just our mutual love of spirituality and this ascension process, but also the independence of our sovereignty, our collective sovereignty as expressions of source and the exposing of the systems that have been harvesting us for eons and generations. So, beautiful, beautiful podcast today. So, thanks for being with us again.
Well, thank you. The pleasure is mine, and God bless you, Anne Marie, and your important work as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for sticking it out to the end. Again, my name is Anne Marie Morales, and you can find all my offerings at ammhypnotherapy.com. Take care until next time.